Robert Leek, Director of Marketing here at eFolder, and would like to welcome everyone to joining us today for finding out a little bit more about our eFolder BDR solution, Replibit, and some of the amazing things that are really kind of circling around this product and kind of where it all came from, right from the horse's mouth, if you will. Mr. Andrew Bensinger, the creator of Replibit, is joining me today to go through a Q&A on the product, the evolution, and really about how the solution impacts the lives of MSPs, their clients, and really just the overall aspect of how they manage BDR. So really appreciate everyone joining us today. We're really excited about getting into this. Just a few housekeeping items we'd like to touch on first and foremost. Just as a reminder, we are recording today's session. The recording will be sent to everyone who has registered. And at this point in time, everyone is on mute, but this is certainly going to be an interactive session. So if you have any questions that come up, either already on the top of mind or as Andrew starts going through the various points on the solution, please feel free to send those questions over via the chat box, and we will get to as many of those both during the program and towards the end as well. Also a reminder, this is part one of a two-part webinar that today we're going to be going really around the conversation of Replibit and how it impacts the MSPs. But most importantly, tomorrow we'll be doing a demo of the product, and Andrew will be walking us through the portals and really how the product is managed on a day-to-day basis. Just want to again thank everyone for joining us, and at this point I'd like to introduce Andrew Bensinger, the man behind the product. Andrew, how you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining me. Really appreciate it. We've gotten to know each other over the last few months as I've joined the company and really gotten my feet wet as it relates to Replibit, and really excited about bringing that to the forefront for everyone who's joining us today. But can you give us a little bit of background, Andrew, on how you kind of got started in technology and maybe even start dipping into how Replibit really came to be?
Sure. I guess my initial introduction to technology was right out of graduate school, where I'd started with the basic help desk stuff and kind of worked my way up through different organizations. And then during the dot-com boom, I was one of the many people who got involved with an organization where we raised tons and tons of money, and we started an ISP and became pretty successful with that. When that ended, I then got into the MSP space. It really wasn't called MSP at the time, but it was the precursor to what became MSPs. And then from there, I was really interested in business continuity and disaster recovery, and that was one of my most enjoyable parts of working with end users in the MSP arena. So I kind of focused in on that and started to put together solutions on how we can improve upon the tape backup methodology at the time. I guess image-based backup was just beginning, but it was image-based to USB drives. There was no notion of offsite data, and we kind of evolved that. I wound up leaving the MSP arena and just focusing, in particular, this was about 2005, on how we can do nearline business continuity in the small to medium marketplace. So we took a look at some of the enterprise technologies out there and said, how can we modify this and make it affordable and roll out solutions in the MSP space? And that's where it all began. I was fortunate enough to get a bunch of patents starting back in 2006 of how you do this stuff. And I did consulting with a lot of different companies on how to get into the market space. And we solved a lot of problems with regard to tapes and offsite data and things of that nature, but we also created a lot of problems inadvertently. The overall solution was better than what had historically been available, and small to medium businesses now had offsite, they now had business continuity, but they also had chains. And chains, as we all know, can be very, very difficult over time and scale. And as our MSPs grow, it's more and more stuff we need to manage. So we kind of took a second look and said, how can we improve upon this? And that was the impetus of Replibit. We figured out how to get rid of chains, and we wanted to flip the nature of where we live on this continuum of backup. And being very proactive about things and getting really in front of what I call the crisis curve with regard to the nature of backups.
Awesome. That's wow. Talk about an evolution from ISP to MSP to kind of focusing then on the disaster recovery and business continuity space. And then it seems like you were, coming into the arena at just the right times as the technologies and the backups were evolving, as you mentioned, from tapes to more 21st century type applications, if you will. But maybe I'd like to dive in a little bit on some of the challenges you saw in the business continuity and disaster recovery area. I know that we've got a lot of things that Replibit has solved for, but I'm guessing that both from today's the some of the differentiators of Replibit today, but even going back 10 years, can you tell us a little bit about that? The challenges that MSPs that, as you were at that time, even still seeing today, some of the things about the reliability, the labor intensity. I know, slows and expensives. Got a graphic up on the screen for everyone to kind of go through some of that. But in those categories, can you just talk to us about what you were seeing and what you were trying to solve around?
Yeah. So, unreliable, sums up a lot within the initial iteration of the notion of what a BDR was. We took a lot of different technologies and we kind of mixed them all together, and then we had to make modifications to those technologies. And a lot of that philosophy, much to my surprise, is still carried through to today. And so a lot of how it's being done still has a lot of the built-in unreliable nature in it. If you were to take image-based backups and leave them the way they were originally created to be, there would be no notion of this off-site component to it. You would have to chains. It creates chains. Chains get very long. We had to figure out a mechanism to get these chains shorter and have a viable path back to the initial backup and things of that nature. And we couldn't do it. So we had to figure out the mechanism how to do it. That in itself created unreliability within the solution, because on a daily basis, you were generating synthetics or roll-ups or whatever you happen to call them, and they were not the original backup sets, and you had to have tracking records following data all the way back to your initial backup, and that initial backup could be from months to years old. And if there was an error anywhere along those lines, all of a sudden you lost recoverability. Move that forward, 10 years, and that still exists in a lot of solutions out there. Whether you lose data going backwards in time or you lose data going forward in time, where you have a break in these chains, you still have the inherent unreliability and concerns about the recoverability of your customer data. That also gets compounded when you want to send that data off-site, because you have to go through that process again when you send the data off-site, or you do it locally, but then you have very, very large files that you then have to get off-site, and that in itself can be problematic. And that unreliability is not only in that scenario becomes evident in if there's a catastrophic failure and you're trying to do a recovery at a remote location or in the cloud, and you're having issues with the data transport or the ability to generate the synthetics after it's been transported. So we spent a lot of time on how to eliminate that factor. Another area where there was unreliability is, in many cases, the virtualization component of the BDR is reading data sets that are not native virtual hard drives. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, trigonometry going on under the hood to make that data reliable, but you're reading down compressed and encrypted backup files as the read portion of your hard drive, and how do you manage the write portion of your hard drive and trick the hypervisor into thinking that these are virtual hard drives, and then you get really bad performance. And whether it is a complete failure in the backup set itself or the chain, or you do happen to get the VM up and running, if the performance on it is so bad, it is still unreliable because the end user doesn't care that it wasn't a failure, and yes, indeed, you got the system up, and you can't really be in a position to say, well, I apologize, Mr. End User, we got your machine up, but you can't use it. So those were some of the challenges that we had to, overcome. And then associated with that is then how labor-intensive it is of managing all of this stuff. And as the MSPs get larger and larger and more sophisticated in their operations, you wind up having to put dedicated staff members into the management of all of these independent systems and checking the integrity of the data both locally and at remote locations. And then all of this stuff with the roll-ups and the getting the data off-site and the virtualizations, time is money. For every minute that the partner is or the end user is down, it costs them money, and it is greater pressure and stress on our partner base, the MSPs. So you want your systems to be very quick. And then there's the cost associated with it. If you're dedicating engineers to the validation of your backup sets and did the data replicate and can I recover it, it starts becoming very, very expensive because you used to have an engineer who was dedicated, let's say, to project work, who is now spending their entire day validating the data sets themselves, and the costs start creeping up, and as you scale, those costs just get greater and greater.
Oh my, okay, thank you. So first off, I'm going to have to kind of chime in as the marketer here. I'm going to have to steal that trigonometry term for you. I don't know if I can use it in the right context, but it'll certainly be used. Outside of that, thank you very much for kind of providing some of the kind of history as it relates to the reliability issues, certainly the labor intensity. And the speed as well. It really all creates a very costly model if MSPs don't really address it and look and see kind of how they can really make their own lives more efficient and provide some, I think peace of mind to themselves and to their clients, which I think we'll get to in a little bit. So, thank you again. What I heard a lot through what you were just sharing with me was about chains. And I know we talk a lot about chains, and I've been out in the field quite often here in my first few months with eFolder, and I speak about chain-free technology and the wonders that Replibit brings. But I don't think I've given my personal audiences the due justice that they deserve. But kind of for us here today, can you walk us through really what Replibit chain-free backup technology really is, and why it's important to the MSP?
Yeah, sure. So we have no notion of dependencies between incremental data points. We have no, as we're calling them, chains. We have no concept of synthetic dailies or daily roll-ups or intradailies or weeklies or monthlies or yearlies in our backup sets. We do things very, very differently. When we take that initial backup of a production system, we are literally doing an on-the-fly P2V or V2V conversion. For those, I'm going to assume most people are familiar with those terms, but a physical to virtual conversion or a virtual to virtual conversion. So when we take that initial backup, we are doing that conversion on the fly while that initial backup is occurring, and we're writing it directly to the Replibit appliance as a virtual hard drive. The moment that backup completes, you can virtualize it. There is no stream out into a secondary, VHD, VMDK, VDI file. It's all native within the initial backup set itself. Now, when the next incremental point in time fires off, we literally do a block level injection directly into that virtual hard drive and make it a nearline mirror production. And we just continue to do that every time a backup fires off. So there is no chain associated with it. Now, the way we allow you to roll back in time is just prior to the moment of data injection. We literally take a SAN snapshot on the Replibit BDR appliance and create a sector map set aside of what that hard drive looked like just prior to that change in data or that delta coming into it. So if you're doing a file restore or a full-blown virtualization from 1 hour ago or 2 years ago, we only need 2 files, the up-to-date virtual hard drive and the sector map of what it looked like 1 hour ago or 2 years ago. We just layer it over the virtual hard drive, and it instantaneously looks like it did for whatever recovery point you're trying to get the data from.
Awesome. So, wow. Okay, so obviously there was a lot that went into the development of this, the product, the solution, the technology, and really backup technology and the backup chain-free aspect that we're dealing with here. Where do you see, the chain-free backup really hitting the MSP as far as where can they really feel, whether it's in the verifications, whether it's in the virtualizations? How can the MSP really take advantage of chain-free versus maybe other chain-based solutions today? Where are they going to see and feel this?
That's a great question, and there's a lot of components to it. So stop me if I start getting long-winded here. first and foremost, you don't have the chain itself to worry about. You don't have to run secondary applications to validate the integrity of the data, both locally on the BDR itself, but also at the remote location. A lot of times you can have recovery on your BDR, but in the transport and then the reconsolidation or generation of synthetics at the remote location, things can go wrong, and then you have to spend a lot of time resurrecting that data and validating it. In our world, those notions just completely disappear, and that is completely off your plate. The second area is the size of the backup sets. When you're generating these consolidated files at the end of the day or week or month or whatever, that's duplication of your data sets within your backup sets. So your devices need to be significantly larger to warehouse all of this data, especially as your retention policies kick in. And then because we are a native virtual hard drive format, and we have a hypervisor on the device itself, we don't need to stream out these recovery points into a secondary virtual hard drive format in the event of a disaster and you have to do some sort of virtualization. Some products allow you to do it in advance, but it makes it very, very difficult to test that data on a daily basis. In our world, we actually have an automated feature. I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit later. But you don't need the space required for that virtual hard drive. So in many cases, depending on what product you're using, you have 3, 4, or 5 copies of the data on your BDRs, and you also have that in the cloud, which is A, more data to manage, and B, more expensive, because the more data you have off-site in many cases, the solution becomes much more expensive.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about that just for 1 second. As it relates to what we do here at eFolder and our Replibit solution, I know storage can be, it's another variable in a lot of ways. How does Replibit look at storage as a part of the overall solution?
Can you ask that question?
I'm just wondering, as far as the solution goes, I know that the MSPs can vault in a myriad of ways, but as it relates to the eFolder cloud, is there any storage that we include with that, or is that something we have to kind of take into consideration with another pricing model?
Got it. So if you were to purchase Replibit with eFolder, we include 2 terabytes of storage for every server agent that you purchase. Our data sets tend to be significantly smaller, so I haven't heard of a single case where anybody has any overage charges. Those 2 terabytes are actually available in an aggregate pool across the number of licenses you have. So let's say you had 10 server licenses. You as a MSP could have a total of 20 terabytes of storage to mix and match across your customer base within the cloud. But because of the nature of our backups being significantly smaller, I truly have never heard of a single case where anybody goes over the allocated limits associated with a particular license. Excellent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. You mentioned a little bit a moment ago kind of the automated feature, and I think it was kind of starting to touch on the way that we verify and really kind of produce reports and how the software works with the testing and the verifications on things. Would you mind just walking our audience through exactly as it relates to the solution and what is checking and what is verifying for the MSP, should they ever need it? How does Replibit work a little differently than maybe what they're used to?
Yeah, excellent question. We actually approach this philosophically very different than traditional products out there. You have to remember, I was at the early days of MSP, and then I watched this type of solution grow out, across the world. I personally saw, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of deployments, and I interacted with lots and lots of MSPs over the development. So when we started Replibit, we wanted to hone in on a couple things that we felt made life difficult for MSPs. So philosophically, we approach things very differently. First and foremost, we're the only product that I know of that we proactively fail backup jobs. We hold data to a very, very high standard. Not only do we want to be able to recover files, but there's this expectation of nearly instant virtualization, and many of our partners are passing that expectation along to their partners. So when we run a backup job, before we log it as successful on the BDR appliance, we actually mount the data set, we enumerate down the directory structure, we look at the NTFS tables, and if the data looks good, then we log it as a successful backup. If it doesn't, we proactively fail that job and we send you a very specific alert that says we were unable to mount the data on the appliance. There's something wrong on the production server, and go take a look at it. As everybody knows, image-based backups are direct mirrors of what's in production. So if we see something that could affect the recoverability of data, we don't want you to have a false sense of security that your backup set was good. We're going to fail the job and tell you about it. That type of alerting holds true throughout the product. We alert for just about anything you could ever think of, because I'm a firm believer in Murphy's Law. And this is how it goes, and I'm sure everybody on the call has felt this. If you don't know about it, you were never given an opportunity to fix it. And if you didn't fix it, invariably, that is when your partner has an emergency something. And it could be as simple as the most important PowerPoint ever, all the way down to the water line broke in the office and flooded out all their servers. But if you didn't know there was a problem prior to that event, you're not going to be able to recover the data. So that is just a philosophical approach that we do, not only with our alerting and also with the mounting of the data, but it also has to do with things we do within the system, like the real-time resilvering of data. I don't know if anybody's ever come across this, but as you start growing, you may see this. Let's say a PowerPoint was backed up, and the backup itself was successful, and it's written to the, in a good fashion to the BDR appliance. But over time, that backup could be sitting there for a year and a half, or that PowerPoint file. And over time, you start to get sector rot on disks, bad blocks on disk. And you may not know about it. And then you go to recover the PowerPoint. You can see it, but if the header information for that PowerPoint is sitting on bad blocks on disk, it'll throw an error when it's trying to read the data. And that's just the nature of computers. So we are constantly scanning our storage pool. We happen to use ZFS for the storage pool, looking for these bad sectors on disk. And if you're configured in a mechanism, a RAID set with a parity bit, if we come across these bad blocks, we'll actually go hit the parity bit and rewrite the data to good sectors on disk so you never knew you had a problem. You would see in the logging of the system, but from a day-to-day operation, a disaster was averted without you ever having to do anything. We also have a feature called our boot VM check, where on it, if you elect to turn that on a daily basis, we will, starting at 1 in the morning, virtualize all the Windows, or we call them protected systems, all the Windows machines we are backing up to a particular appliance. We'll start virtualizing those sequentially at 1 in the morning and take screenshots of the login screen. And we will email it to you. If you happen to be using ConnectWise, we can create a ticket for you and put the image in ConnectWise. It's in our device GUI, but we also have a centralized management portal, and all those images are uploaded into the management portal along with the timestamp of what point in time was virtualized. And in about 30 seconds, you can just scan through, and you're looking for anything other than the Control-Alt-Delete screen.
Wow. Okay. So it sounds like as it relates to the testing, the verification, the display that's then provided to the MSP and of course their staff in managing this on a daily basis, it seems to be pretty robust. And at the same time, I've heard some folks talk about, you guys are failing data, but to your point, we're only failing those issues that when there's an issue. And it seems like, while it can certainly be challenging when you're dealing with it, it's going to, kind of work around Murphy's Law and kind of hopefully give you a fail-safe against that. But it feels like it'll help the MSPs really have a little bit better quality of life and sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that their BDRs are truly accurate and available when their clients need them. Is that a fair way to kind of say that?
Yeah, I think it is a fair statement. If you are the engineer responsible for the BDRs, generally speaking, when a customer calls and says, I need some sort of recovery, the first thought that crosses our mind is, I hope the backup was good. I don't feel that's a good place to live your life. And when we were creating Replibit, we wanted to put as many measures in place to mitigate that from as a feeling when that phone call comes in. And another example that is unrelated to the backup itself but goes into that feeling is in our replication. So, replication in and of itself is one thing. The second thing is the availability of the data at the remote site. So when you are replicating data, traditional methodology is, let's just send the data to the remote site, and when it gets there, let's give you a green checkbox, and the data is off-site. That doesn't mean you can recover the data, or is your replication falling behind in time? So when we replicate, we'll alert on whether there's a problem with sending the data off-site, but we also measure the recovery points across the the retention policies. In our world, you can have a different local retention policy than you have off-site. But what we will do is we're going to say, did we send the data, and was the data ingested in the system, and is it recoverable in the off-site location? And if it is lagging behind in your recovery points, or the recovery points that are in the offsite location compared to that overlap in retention policies, we're going to send you an alert. And this is just an example, and it's an out-of-sync alert, and that's us telling you, hey, your data's getting off-site, but there's something wonky going on with your vault. Maybe you've tapped your I/O capability of the particular vault that you're sending, all the data to. Maybe it's a little oversubscribed, and the ingestion of that data and its availability may not be there, and you need to know about that.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think we'll take a pause. We'll come back. I want to get a little bit more around a few things, and we'll talk about the global management portal a little bit and the appliances, which I think is a pretty neat story around Replibit as well. But first, a couple of questions have come in. First, James Martin from Tampa, Sarasota wants to say hello and good to see you. But I'm also curious as far as how long does it take to spin up a VM in the eFolder cloud?
It depends on size. So we offer, and it was on a graphic that was up on the screen a little bit earlier. So we offer what we call multi-vault replication, and then there are different types of recovery that you can do. And it's nice to talk to you again as well. In the eFolder cloud, if you're using the Replibit solution, the recovery methodology is nearly identical to that if you're using other products in the eFolder cloud. So should there be a site-wide disaster and you need to access virtual machines in the eFolder cloud, you would open a ticket with us, and we would spin up a machine in our continuity cloud, and we would copy the data out of the Replibit Vault in a native hypervisor format directly to your continuity node, and you'd be able to spin up your VM. The length of that recovery is determined by the size of the data set. Of all the eFolder solutions, Replibit is the fastest copy job into that continuity cloud. If you are vaulting to yourself, we have native virtualization capability built into the vault. So the recovery is identical to that of an appliance, where you would just hop on the remote vault at your data center and hit the virtualize button, and your machines will spin up nearly instantly. But in the eFolder cloud, there is that you declare a disaster and we spin up your continuity node. So hopefully that answers the question.
Wonderful, thank you. And then from Dwayne, he's wondering really about any information on the Replibit roadmap that you might be able to share with us today, and specifically any improvements as it relates to protection from ransomware.
I am not the person to talk necessarily about the roadmap. I can talk in general about some things we're doing. We actually have a product manager who knows a lot greater detail about that. Now, with regard to ransomware, knock on wood, it's actually an excellent question. Knock on wood, Replibit users so far haven't seen a major problem with ransomware, and it has to do with architecturally how Replibit is designed. We do not have any network shares open to the network. And traditional ransomware, crawls the network, finds a share, and starts encrypting all the files on that share. And if you are running some sort of backup agent that is just writing to an SMB share or a Windows share on the network, it can encrypt that data. All of our data is warehoused within a ZFS object store, and there is no open share out to the network. When a backup actually fires off, an encrypted tunnel is generated between the agent and the appliance. That data is written to the appliance, and then that tunnel is cut. And there's no easy method for ransomware to actually attach to the appliance and encrypt data.
Awesome, thank you. We've got a couple more, looks like roadmap type questions. Anything in the future for Macs on there? And just as specifically, maybe yes, no, is Replibit capable of a bare metal restore?
Yeah, we're absolutely capable of bare metal restore. We can do bare metal restore to dissimilar hardware. We also know that a lot of our partners no longer install directly on bare metal. So let's say you had an older server that died. When the new hardware comes in, yes, you can restore to the new hardware. But a lot of our partners will throw a hypervisor on there. They may throw, VMware ESXi or Hyper-V on it. And if that's the case, in our world, you just hit the particular recovery point and hit the export button, and you get a pop-up window saying, do you want a VHD, VHDX, VMDK, VDI, or RAW file? And we will hand you a fully formed virtual hard drive that you can just copy over to your hypervisor and then spin up your machine there as a full recovery.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. I just encourage everyone to, send out any questions, specifically if you've got anything around the chain-free technology or the testing and virtualizations and verifications. Please just shoot those over. Let's maybe transfer over the conversation a little bit to the appliance side. I know that, pardon me, as the Replibit became a part of the eFolder family. I know, there was a lot of things done in those early days, but I believe one of the big wins and the things that we were excited about were the appliances that launched, I believe, September, October, about a year or so ago last year.
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the appliances, maybe kind of where we started and where are we today?
Yeah, sure. So, Replibit started as a software-only company where our partners would bring their own devices. Once we were acquired by eFolder, eFolder had a lot of time and experience in building BDRs because they had been doing that for other flavors under their open architecture for quite some time. So I sat down with Kevin Hoffman, our CEO and CTO at the time, CEO at the time and CTO, about should this be an offering for Replibit as well, and the answer was yes. So Kevin did his magic, and he is the most detailed person you will ever meet when it comes to IT. And he went into incredible nitty-gritty detail in designing these devices and has built really the industry-leading device with regard to speed on the market. Those initial suite of devices were 100% pure SSD devices at close to cost of regular spindled devices. And the reason Kevin insisted on going with enterprise class SSDs was performance. He wanted those VMs to run better, the emergency VMs to run better than the production machines out there. And we had wild success with that. And then as the product offering grew, we realized that there were some use case scenarios where the performance wasn't quite as necessary, but higher density was. So Kevin went back to the drawing board and said, how can I achieve pretty darn good performance while having greater density? And we came to the conclusion of using hybrid drives. So they're spindled SATA drives with SSD caches on them. So you get pretty darn good performance, not this spectacular performance of flash-based SSD devices, but much, much higher density at a more affordable price compared to all SSD units. We then expanded upon the line, not only offering the two versions, the flash-based and the hybrid drive-based, but we also realized that there was a little niche out there for smaller installations, and that's where we came up with the Nano. The Nano is a single drive unit. All Nanos have an SSD in it, so the virtualization on the devices is surprisingly fast for such a small unit. And they're inexpensive, and they go from 500 gigs to 2 terabytes in size. It's offered, all of our devices are offered under two licensing models. One is endpoint licensing. The other is storage-based licensing. So if you have a deployment with lots and lots of small machines, go with the storage-based license. If you have a couple of very large machines, go with endpoint licensing, and you'll see a better cost structure for the issue you're trying to solve. But these are powerful, incredibly fast. They support full-blown virtualization on them, and of course they send the data off-site. Next up from that are the Minis, Pros, and Racks. All of those are rated units. The Minis actually have 4 hard drives in them, 1 for the OS and 3 for the storage, and a RAID 5 set, or technically under the hood it's a Z-RAID 1 set. The Pros and Racks are field upgradable. They hold, I think the Pro holds 20 hard drives, and the Rack holds up to 24, and you can buy the smallest size that you need, and know you can order expansion packs from us and grow these units out. We will expand them in RAID 5 sets, put a zero stripe over the top, giving you RAID 50 for improved performance across all the devices. And the Pros and Racks also have lights out cards for your higher-end customers for out-of-band management.
Awesome. Yeah, one of the appliances do get a lot of excitement. As you mentioned, just to put a confirmation on that, Replibit is certainly still a BYOD solution. So if our MSPs are of the want or just the wherewithal to build their own devices, we can certainly still support that. Yes.
Absolutely. I'm a firm
Wonderful.
believer in BYOD. It's never been my philosophy that I'm here to dictate your business model. I'm just here to assist with the service offering that you're giving. So we provide this hardware as a convenience to you, and we back the hardware and warranty it, but we're here to support you fully in a BYOD environment as well.
Yeah, and one of the ways I kind of put this into context when I've had these conversations in the past is really about the Ferraris and the Cadillacs, right? Is that those initial appliances that we launched, they were a little bit more pricey, but man, they can fly when it comes right down to it when the need is there. We heard the need that was out there in the marketplace that while these are Ferraris, not everybody wants to or needs to drive a Ferrari, and came back in with a more cost-effective solution and really put it into play where whether it's you in your business model as an MSP or whether it's your clients' wants and needs, but we really kind of balance the needs of performance, cost, and density within the appliance from a storage perspective, and I think the graphic on the screen right there really puts a nice point on it for our audience. So thank you again for walking us through that.
Sure, you're 100% correct. And just to hammer in on the Ferrari thing, I have not heard a single case where somebody had to do an emergency virtualization on one of our flash-based units where that VM wasn't faster than the production machine. They're absolutely amazing units.
Fantastic. And just so everyone knows, Andrew was mentioning some of the flexibilities as it relates to the storage density of these appliances. They do kind of span the horizon, if you will, and the graphic there on the screen kind of shows you, across the different appliances, how much storage that you can get out of each one. And to your point, it is field upgradable as well and really can revolve around that. We do have a couple more questions come in. One here from Clint, and it kind of goes back to the ransomware, but it's a pretty specific question I think may apply across our audience here, and just give me a moment to get through this. So it says, speaking in regards to the ransomware you mentioned, if ransomware didn't encrypt the backups, does Replibit run some type of ongoing verification on the backup files that would fail and alert the MSP that they have indeed been encrypted? Is this verification / alerting run on both the local BDR and the eFolder cloud?
That's an excellent question. And the answer is, I'm thinking through the underlying technology. If the production machine were encrypted and we were still able to access the files and back them up, that encryption for that particular point in time would indeed be carried into the backup set, but it would not encrypt any other particular recovery point. Example being, and when I talk to partners, I use this a lot. Because we're not chain-based, we have the ability to delete recovery points, and you do not lose data recoverability before that or after it. And the example I like to use around that happens to do with ransomware. So let's say you are running backups hourly, and your end user gets CryptoLocker at midnight. You find out at 8 in the morning. You would have 8 backups that indeed contain CryptoLocker within it. In our world, you can hop on the GUI of the appliance and delete the 8 backups that have CryptoLocker, and then they are out of the backup set, and any recovery point prior to that is fine. And if you've cleaned up your production server or done a restore of your production server, anything moving forward would no longer have CryptoLocker. But I think the underlying question is, if that data is encrypted on the production machine, if we have the ability to back it up, it will get carried over into the backup set. No, we don't actually access the data at the file level and then try to open files and see if they are encrypted and report on that.
Okay. I think that last piece really hit on what Clint was going for as it relates to whether the backup files were being encrypted and the testing process. So I think you touched on that, but Clint let us know. James is also wondering, can Replibit do VM nesting?
It depends on the deployment. If the question is, can Replibit run as a VM and then spin up a down system as a VM within the VM, the answer is it depends on the hypervisor. For example, if you install Replibit as a VM within ESX or ESXi 5.1 and above, you have the full functionality of Replibit. You can recover all your data. And yes, you can spin up a VM inside of the VM as an emergency system. If it is Hyper-V, That functionality does not work. The nesting of that emergency VM doesn't work, but it's just a function of how Hyper-V works and the particular hypervisor that we use, which is called KVM.
Okay, wonderful. And one other thing here is, can Replibit run on a Windows operating system based BDR?
No.
Okay.
No,
And what I was going to ask you, can you just elaborate a little bit, please?
Yeah, I was just about to say, so in our solution, if you're under a BYOD scenario, you would download our ISO image. That ISO image includes the operating system. We happen to use an Ubuntu kernel. It includes the Type 1 hypervisor and all of the Replibit software built into this single installer. You just rip it to a DVD or a USB, and you go next. It's a 10-minute install. But one of our goals in Replibit was to get away from you having to pay for Windows licensing in order to offer BDR services. The management of our unit is completely web GUI. We have zero expectation that our partners know how to operate Linux. If you do, that's great because we can teach you some cool stuff under the hood. But the vast majority of our partners never actually log into the console itself, and they do everything from the web GUI.
Excellent. What software technology writes the backup to the local storage?
Well, it's our own backup agent. We leverage the Microsoft VSS writers to capture the changed data sets, and then we send the data through an encrypted tunnel directly into the ZFS object store. Hopefully that answers the question.
Hopefully so. And just lastly, well, not lastly, but as questions come in, I know we kind of promised everyone about 45 minutes or so, but we're certainly willing to go as long as we need to. Do want to make sure that, was there anything else on the global management portal? I noticed you mentioned some of the screenshots that the MSPs are able to utilize and kind of see as they boot it up every evening. Anything else that really provides some takeaways from the portal, or is that pretty much the punchline?
No, there's a whole lot of functionality built into the management portal. What we're trying to do is make life easier on our partners by having all devices in the field, regardless of whether it's an appliance or the offsite Vault component. We wanted it to report up to that management portal. So most of our partners spend their life in the management portal. And when you are in there, you can see every single device you have in the field. You can see every single Windows machine that you are backing up. It's all sortable and searchable. It has tabs for backup status. You can see that the backup agents are connected to the appliance. They heartbeat each other every 60 seconds, so you'll know if an agent is offline and can't communicate with the appliance. You will see last backup time. You'll see timestamps of the last time the appliance or Vault checked in with the management portal. You will see replication status. You will see the last ingested recovery point on the offsite Vault, meaning you may be sending data, and we do have that out of sync alert that I mentioned earlier, but on a daily basis, and it's updated hourly, you can see what is the recovery point for the offsite location. Am I starting to creep behind? Is everything look good? That's a green-red scenario with those timestamps. And then, of course, we have that boot VM report where in the single screen you can see all the screenshots of your systems. But we also have built-in remote control capability of every device you have in the field, regardless of whether it's an appliance or a Vault. We do it through a web browser, so if you were to click the remote button for a particular appliance, it's going to open a new tab in your browser, and you can log in directly into that appliance just as though you were sitting on the LAN, so there's no requirement for any third-party software like TeamViewer or LogMeIn or anything like that to access your devices. And if you're good at Linux, you can actually get to the command line of the units directly from that management portal as well. And one last thing, that management portal is also multi-tenanted. So if you wanted to give your end users real-time access to the management portal to see the status of your backups, when they log in with their individual credentials, they would only see their machines. But when you log in as the admin, you see all your customers' machines.
Excellent. Yes, I know that can be a big deal as it relates to the relationship that our MSPs have with their clients. So thank you very much for pointing that out. Curious, question coming in from Kevin Luke. Can LabTech Automate, the agent for that, be installed on the appliance or BYOD?
Yes, you can absolutely install it on our appliance. We have some partners who put it on directly, or we broadcast on an SNMP community string. It happens to be called Replibit. So a lot of our partners will take an existing Windows RMM agent that they have deployed and just poll us like we were a firewall or a router or whatever. But you can do it either way.
Excellent, thank you. Here's an interesting question from Jay Lee, and I think I've heard this in a few different versions, but the question is, does the solution come with virtual standby function as an available option? Meaning, can the servers be used as a standby server on the side at all time?
Can it be used as a standby server? Can I get a little bit of clarification on that?
Well, I'm guessing, I think, is that, so the appliance, can the appliance just, how long can the appliance run as the primary server for the data that's being, accessed and used from the client?
Got it. So if I understand the question correctly, and I'll talk about the scenario, a customer loses their file server locally.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the question is, can you spin them up as an emergency VM on the Replibit appliance, and how long can it run that way?
I believe so.
Yeah, the answer is yeah, you absolutely can. You just hit the Start VM button in the GUI, and it will ask you, how many cores do you want? How much RAM do you want for this? Do you need to boot off of an ISO? Do you need to install some of the advanced tools for the particular hypervisor that we're running? And then you just hit the Start button, and it will spin up. We have live mode and test mode. If it's in live mode, that's what the mode you would select if the end user's production server went down. This machine will come up live on the network. We instantaneously create a ZFS clone so your backup sets remain intact, yet we're capturing change coming into that VM while it's up and running. This is an emergency VM, so I wouldn't recommend leaving it running forever. However, we have had instances where, for whatever reason, that emergency VM or standby VM has been running for a couple months. As long as there's horsepower on the appliance and I/O capability, I mean, it in theory could run indefinitely.
Excellent. And as it relates to backing up upon itself in that state, how does that work?
Well, right now, we took a philosophy of these machines are not going to be running for a very long time. It's going to have a lot of I/O while the VM is running on it, and in many, many cases, that appliance is also backing up other machines. And all of the data is within a compressed object store, so we're doing reads and writes in and out of a compressed area on disk. We took a position of, if we were trying to run backups, let's say on 3 other machines, and run a VM, and back up that VM onto the same device, and then do what's called a non-sequential read and send the data off-site, the appliance would grind to a halt. So we said, you know what, that's probably not the best idea. Where can we meet in the middle on this? And that goes back to the ZFS clone that I was talking about. So what we decided was, when that emergency VM is spun up in live mode, to create a SAN snapshot of it, do real-time changes into that particular snapshot. So let's say you lost power, you wouldn't lose all the data while it's running as emergency VM. And the example I'd like to use is, you're having a very, very bad day. Your customer just lost their Exchange server. You remoted in. You spun up the Exchange server as an emergency VM on the Replibit appliance. You're on site 6 hours later trying to figure out what happened to the RAID controller on the production Exchange server, and you step on the power cord of the Replibit appliance. Some products out there, you just lost that 6 hours of change. In our world, you wouldn't. When you go to spin up that VM again, we would recognize the fact that you had previously been running as a live mode VM, and we will spin up from that ZFS snapshot or that clone that we created, and all your changes will be there up until the moment that you had lost power. With that being said, we are not doing active backups of that emergency VM because of the I/O issue that I was talking about before. There are workarounds. There are some unique scenarios out there where we have to break the rules on that and allow for these backups to occur, and our support team can help you with that. But we're literally blocking the communication of the network bridge layer.
Okay, thank you. Sounds like a lot of thought went into those instances for in the unfortunate instances that they do happen, there's answers there. So thank you.
There are.
Kind of in that same vein, not really on the kind of active, running the BDR as the active server, but can Replibit spin up multiple VMs, i.e. DC, file server, Exchange, and will they know how to relate to each other when they're all up and going?
The answer is yes. And you can even do that in a test mode virtualization. When you do, it's the same mode we use for the boot VM check on a nightly basis. Anytime you launch a VM, we ask you is it live mode or test mode. If it's test mode, we create that same ZFS clone. The virtual switch is disconnected, but any machine that is spun up simultaneously in test mode is on the same physical network in that sandbox area, and they can all talk to each other. So you can, spin up a DC and an Exchange server in test mode, make sure that there's communications between the two, and then shut them down. When it's in test mode, when you power it off, all the changes that you made to those machines are discarded. And once again, in live mode, we would keep those changes.
Gotcha. Wonderful. And so thank you, Lonnie, for that question. And it's like he was up pretty excited about the answer, too. Thank you, Andrew. Veronica is wondering, can we replicate our clients to our own data center?
Absolutely. And in fact, there's no charge for that. So whether you are doing a BYOD or using eFolder hardware for your appliances, that same philosophy also holds to our vaults as well. You can do a BYOD and download our ISO and build a vault. The vault is what we call the offsite component, and it's the multi-tenant repository of all the data across all your appliances. You can use the eFolder hardware for that. You can do BYOD for it. But that's included in the backup agent license. So there is no upcharge if you want to send that data back to your data center. Feel free. We have a lot of partners, and looking at the graphic that Robert has up on the screen, we have a lot of partners who do both, where they will send it to the eFolder cloud, but nothing beats having the data local to yourself as well. And in the unlikely event your customer does have an outage, what a lot of partners will do in this scenario is declare a disaster with eFolder, but also try to recover the data out of the vault that they have at their own physical location. And in many cases, it's just easier to manage that data because it's near you and you are near the client, and it gives you a whole bunch of flexibility with regard to that. And as I mentioned before, you can do instant virtualization directly on that vault as well if it's in your data center.
Excellent. And just a moment to do a quick roadmap rear view perspective. We have changed this what we're doing with that now as it relates to May. We launched the ability to vault simultaneously to both eFolder and their own private cloud. Was that correct? Am I repeating that correctly?
Yeah, that is correct. That May is when we launched what we call multi-vault replication, and you can actually send the data to, in theory, an unlimited number of vaults. So you could send it to eFolder, you could send it to yourself, and you could send it to a secondary office at your customer location, wherever you want. You could send it to 3, 4, 5 places if you so choose.
Wonderful. Kevin was wondering, does backup performance get better after the initial backup of the server, or is it consistent due to not having the backups change?
Well, the initial backup is always somewhat heavy in the sense that we got to capture all the data on disk. So they tend to take longer and they're more processor and more disk intensive. After that, the backups are very, very quick. I mean, there's some odd scenarios out there where we have to spend a little bit more time reading through some transaction log data. But for the vast majority of the time, those incremental changes, if you're running it on an hourly basis, your backup should be done in 2 minutes in most cases. The backup agent in and of itself is relatively quick. And our networking protocol, we happen to use one called Thrift, and that's the encrypted tunnel that the agent generates to the appliance, is incredibly fast. If you were to actually turn on jumbo frames on your NICs and had a switch that support it, we would cap out the backplane of your switch. The backups are fast.
Awesome. Very cool. And just a reminder to folks, we are getting close to the top of the hour. We will, if we carry all the way to then, we'll stop at that point in time, but keep those questions coming in for Andrew as needed. We've got a couple more here. There's one, I'm going to address this question a little sensitively. It says that the Replibit admin guide references limitations around the ability to spin up OEM licensed machines.
Yeah.
Will the solution just simply not do that at all, or is that more legalese?
We have a responsibility to notify you about the proper utilization of the licensing of your servers. How's that for an answer?
I'll take it. Hopefully that works for Lonnie as well.
Yeah.
Larry is wondering, if you use the multi-vault to two different places, does it double the bandwidth requirements, or is there a broadcast that is more efficient?
No, it does double the bandwidth requirement. We are highly efficient in our ability to replicate data. There's never ever duplicate data ever sent over the wire under any circumstance. So, but it does require duplication of data sets. And there was a big internal discussion of, do we have the appliance send it independently to two places, or do we have it go to Vault A and then Vault A resend it to Vault B? And we came to the decision of, let's just send it twice. And the reason for that is there are a couple things there. Number one, bandwidth is becoming much, much more available than it used to be. If somebody's on a DSL line, it's probably not going to work. But in most cases, the outbound bandwidth is sufficient to do it. B, we are, as I mentioned before, incredibly efficient in getting that data off-site. You'd be amazed at the speed at which it can go. General rule of thumb is, for every megabyte of available bandwidth that you have, we can push about 7 gigabytes of data every 24 hours. If your server has more, if you only have 1 meg available and your server has more than 7 gigs of data, we need to have a long discussion about what's actually going on there. And then the third thing was the vaults themselves. Our partners try to be as cost effective as possible. And a lot of these vaults, if you're vaulting to yourself, are based on SATA drives. And we all know, most SATA drives out there, not the enterprise class ones, but most of the server grade SATA drives are 7,200 RPM disks. And the average vault that we see in the field is a 2U vault with 12 spindler, 12 SATA drives in it. If you have, let's say, 30 appliances in the field changing.
I think we have lost Andrew right in mid-sentence, folks. Well, with that, we're right at the top of the hour. I will, thank Andrew. We'll see if he's able to dial back in. But in respect of the fact that we're 3 minutes from that point, just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. I apologize we weren't able to get to all the questions. For those we didn't get to address, we will try to pull those out and get back to you as we can. Certainly get to you as much information as possible. I would like to just kind of, as we close, remind everyone that we'll be sending, the recording of this to you for reference if you need it. We're also doing a second part for this webinar tomorrow, where Andrew is going to be walking us through an actual demo of the product. So where today was a lot of philosophy, kind of how we got to where we are, the technology itself. Tomorrow, Andrew will be putting that on demonstration for everyone to see.
If my phone doesn't cut out again.
Yeah, well, thanks for jumping in. I was just closing us up. I think we've gotten to a point where,
Sure.
Our questions are getting pretty in-depth. Your answers are wonderfully doing the same. So in the effort to just kind of, we'll pull some of those off. I'll shoot those to you, Andrew, and we'll get the answers back to the people who've asked them. I did want to point out that you are going to be out in the field here over the next few months. Starting next month down in Miami at Autotask Community Live event, you're going to be there with some of the other folks from the eFolder team, and you'll be able to put Replibit on demo and answer any questions, as well as in November at IT Nation in Orlando. You'll be there as well. So I just want to give that kind of PSA to everyone out there. No confusion with any actual PCA solutions, of course. But again, Andrew, thank you very much for today. It's been wonderful. Really learned a lot from myself, and hopefully our audience did as well. And again, thank you to everyone who's joined us. We'll get this out to you and get some questions as well. So have a great one. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you again at same bat time tomorrow. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, everyone.